Hot Springs Village Inside Out is a closer look at the greatness of Hot Springs Village, Arkansas and the surrounding areas. People, places, experiences. Hot Springs Village is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host Dennis Simpson as we engage in weekly conversations to explore Hot Springs Village Inside Out. Today's show is brought to you by Central Arkansas's favorite radio station, KVRE. Find them on the dial at 92.9 FM. Stream them live at kvre.com. RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village. The award-winning RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village is the largest real estate office inside the village with over 30 full-time agents and support staff. Visit them to learn more about this beautiful place to solve your real estate needs. Call them today at 1-800-364-9007. Find them online at explorehsv.com. They are RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village at 1-800-364-9007 or online at explorehsv.com. Ike Eisenhower State Farm. Ike and his award-winning team have been serving the insurance needs of folks all around Hot Springs Village since 1998. Ike has qualified for State Farm's President's Club, Chairman's Circle, and Hot Springs Village Insurance Agent of the Year. Call Ike Eisenhower State Farm today at 501-984-4100. That's 501-984-4100. Find them online at ikeeisenhower.net. Call them today for all your insurance needs because, like a good neighbor, Ike Eisenhower State Farm is there.
Today with Miss Liz Robbins. Liz, I can't tell you what a pleasure this is. Known you for so many years. We are with the Garland County Historical Society, which is commonly referred to as the what?
GCHS?
No, the Garland County Hysterical Society. That's what you people call it. Yeah.
And it is pretty hysterical around here a lot of times.
Well, you know, and y'all have such interesting people. I mean, seriously, there's a lot of volunteers that come and help. But it is a nonprofit. You're a 501c3, right?
Yes, we are, and we don't get any government funding. We're supported by the community, by membership fees, sales of our books and products, donations, some grants occasionally. So we're supported by the community.
Well, tell me what kind of books. I have an idea, but what kind of books and products? I mean, it's an association. How do you fundraise with that? What's the story there?
Oh, well, we publish a book like we've published the wonderful historian Orville Albritton's books like The Mob at the Spa, Dangerous Visitors, Hot Springs Gunsmoke, Lawman, which is about Sheriff Clay White. We publish them, and then, of course, we sell them.
Now, Hot Springs Gunsmoke, you got me at Gunsmoke. What's that? Is that the one at the corner of Prospect and Central?
Oh, I don't see it, but it's the one that comes before Dangerous Visitors. It tells about the early days, and Hot Springs has this incredible law enforcement history, or you could say, you know, it's Wild West days, like when Jesse James and the Cole Younger gang came here and robbed the stagecoach, or the 1899 big shootout on Central Avenue, which killed more people than the gunfight at OK Corral. But what was odd about it, it was a fight between the police department and the sheriff's department, which is a whole strange, interesting story that left several men dead on Central Avenue, and just lots of interesting events in our history. And Orville, who just passed in January, was a fabulous historian and a wonderful storyteller. So his books are particularly popular.
Yeah, and we hated to see him go. He was a fantastic author and a
wonderful
source of information on everything.
And what was so great about him was that he was determined that if he wrote something down or said it, he could document it. There's so many, there's so many myths and legends and stories about Hot Springs history that float around. And some of them, you know, not too accurate or can't be pinned down. But if Orville put it in a book, he had double-checked sources. He had looked through endless copies of microfilm and newspapers. He'd gotten police records. He
Wow.
didn't say it happened unless he could prove it happened. So you can rely on the historical accuracy of his
Yeah, but
work.
that's not as much fun as just making stuff up. Come on.
That's true, and people do love to do that about Hot Springs.
They do.
We're still trying to kill that story that there's a secret tunnel between the Arlington Hotel and the Southern Club across the street that Al Capone built so he could secretly get from the Arlington to the Southern Club. And of course, that's probably the biggest story out there. That,
but here's
of course,
the deal.
Never happened.
It's based on a good nearer truth. And that is, there is one that goes from wherever the little photography shop is to the Southern shop. You know, there was an underground bowling alley, and 2 doors down there was the Southern Club, but it didn't go under the Arlington.
It didn't have a tunnel that went all the way across Central Avenue. It just had a little outlet to Hot Springs Creek. Of course, there's a tunnel going down Central Avenue that way.
Well, when did they build the tunnel for Hot Springs Creek? Roughly what year?
1883 to 1884.
So it would have been merely impossible for Al Capone to have crossed because he would have gone through the creek, right?
Yes, he would have had to tunnel underneath that tunnel. And of course, he didn't have any fear of walking across the street. He came here to have a good time. There were no warrants out for his arrest here. He was on good terms with the police here.
That would be an understatement.
And Hot Springs was considered to be sort of a place where opposing mobs left each other alone so they could all come here and have a good time.
Well, let me say just a couple of things here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Mm-hmm. Hot Springs was considered the Valley of the Vapors, and it was a place that the Indians would come and heal for thousands of years, and everyone would come. It was a neutral, even warring tribes wouldn't fight at the Vapors. Is that correct?
That's the folklore version of it.
But I like my version.
More modern, I know it's a wonderful story, but a lot of that was made up by railroad promoters trying to get people to buy tickets to come to Hot Springs.
Really?
Native Americans didn't normally travel hundreds of miles or long distances to go to some other place to heal. Each group had their own methods in their own locations. Now, the Native Americans who were around here quite possibly, of course, used the healing power of the thermal waters, but vast numbers of Native Americans from all over the place coming here for the waters is a myth. Now, the thing more likely to bring people here or have more contact among tribes was the novaculite mining. The Native Americans here, the Caddo, mine novaculite here, which of course we think of as whetstones today, but they used it for arrowheads and cutting tools of various types. And they can do DNA on minerals, and they found these novaculite Indian artifacts hundreds of miles away from Hot Springs, and check the DNA in it, and they can say that was from that mine in Hot Springs, Arkansas. So
really?
That was part of a big trading network among the Native American tribes.
Well, and here's the deal. As always, people who are involved in this, we just literally hop in and jump on top of it. Let me back up and give some people that don't have enough context of the 5 Mile High view. There's a creek that runs through the middle of Hot Springs, and that creek basically we call now Bathhouse Row, and it carried hot springs and excrement and all kinds of things out to what now the lake, or would have been the river, and they covered that over in the 1800s because it was frankly kind of a mess. Is that fair enough?
It was a mess. It was used for sewage. It smelled. It was in the way. You had to have these little bridges and stuff to get from the street to the bathhouses on the east side of town, and it was a real health hazard. So the government funded the putting underground of that creek because it would help the what was then the Hot Springs Reservation before it became Hot Springs National Park.
Yeah, let's go through that again.
The creek was a mess.
Yeah, we had Tim Ernst on here about 2 months ago, And one of the things, and it's just my beef, and you know, you bring up a good point. It's how history is told. When you leave history to advertising men, they love to tell you how the Indians came from hundreds of miles, and not quite the truth, right? Well, when you leave the other details to admin, the story sounds so good right up until it's not exactly how it used to be worked out, right?
Yeah, that's true. And advertising was a huge part of Hot Springs history. The bathhouse owners, the hotel owners, all the businessmen here were always promoting Hot Springs. And sometimes, you know, a good story is a way to promote a place. And of course, the best story they had was the healing powers of the thermal water. That was firmly believed in by people in the 19th and earliest part of the 20th centuries. But, you know, before advances in modern medicine, what do you do if you've got severe rheumatism or this or other? The waters were the people's last chance in a way, and people from all over the country came here to take a long series of baths. Maybe, you know, they would several weeks long or a couple of months they'd stay. And of course, there was a lot of advertising of the benefits of the thermal water, and we became a health resort. That was the reason for our existence.
Well, and what I was going to go with Tim Ernst, one of who's the guy that does the documentaries on PBS, the Civil War and so forth, but Ken Burns. He did one about the national parks, which were no argument one of the greatest decisions of the United States ever, no question. But he made note that Yellowstone was the first national park, and I'm like, no. How about the first time they called it a park? We were a national reserve, 50 years before that, something?
Well, since 1832, it was.
Lord.
And in fact, the speaker at our last monthly meeting talked about this issue and the importance of hot springs in the national park system. And people can go to the Garland County Library Facebook page or YouTube site and see a recording of that program by Dr. Kane West, who's a National Park Ranger, and find out a whole lot more about that issue. We were one of the first pieces of land reserved for the use of the federal government, which is why it's called a reservation. And it was for future health benefits of people. But we weren't named a national park until 7 years after the National Park Service was formed. So, but you know, when they put out those quarters of the national parks a few years ago, Hot Springs was the very first quarter they put out. So
it always, because it was the oldest park. Yeah, we were the oldest park, no matter what.
We weren't officially named the first in the national park system when it was created in 1916, but we certainly were devoted. We certainly got reserved for use by the federal government long before Yellowstone was.
1832, really?
Yes.
40 years before 30 years before the Civil War. Well, and the reason I brought this up today, and Liz, I hope you're happy. You've done it. You're going to have to be a reoccurring guest because you have so much information. We would love to have you again and again and again.
Well, I would love to. I love to talk about our history. I think it's so fascinating. I think people are really interested in it.
Well, they are, no question. And that's one of the things that was driving this conversation. I knew that people had been wanting shows on this, and particularly to this point, the dark corner. Now, people are like, okay, Dennis, on the map, you have the Cortez Golf Course pulled up. But before it was the Cortez Golf Course, and before there was and let me zoom in here, before there was a grave in the middle of the road, right about there. Yeah, right about there. Before a guy got buried in the middle of the road for eternity, there was an area that you and I would have called the dark corner of Garland County. Now, number one, it doesn't look too dark to me, but number two, why would they call it that?
Yeah, I wish I could. We have to talk about how I can pull up a map too, but Marble Township was a township that was like twice as big as it is today. And when Garland County was formed in 1873, it was formed mainly from part of Hot Spring County, you know, where Malvern was the county seat. And it took a little bit of Montgomery County, and it took half of Marble Township away from Saline County. So the eastern part of Marble Township stayed in Saline County, and the western part became Marble Township in Garland County, and it became known as the Dark Corner. We can talk about that. But the people in Marble Township still thought of themselves as one community, just like Hot Springs Village is one community, even though half of it's in Garland County and half of it's in Saline. But yeah, so that's how Marble Township in Garland County got formed.
Now, what years are we talking about roughly?
That was it. It was carved out from Saline County in 1873.
Okay.
Now, the land had started to be settled in the late 1830s, 1840s. By farmers coming in, and it was never, it was always pretty sparsely populated, but they settled mainly in the bottomlands along Bushy Creek, Mill Creek, and the fork of the Saline River there, and farmed the bottomlands. They did some lumbering eventually. Eventually, there was like a stave mill that made wood for barrels in Jesseville. They formed little communities like Marble and Bethlehem and Beaudry and
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was at State Farm. I was at Ike Eisenhower's office at State Farm the other day. And I talked to a lady, and I said, well, I was outside the gate in the Dark Corner, and I said, I love Beaudry. And she said, you mean Boudry?
Boudry. Yeah.
And I said, no, Beaudry. She said, no, Boudry. He was French. And okay.
I don't know either. I've always called it Beaudry, but I'm kind of ignorant, so I don't know. But and it was a farming community mainly, with a little bit of lumbering. Also, in the winter, after the crops were in and before the spring planting, the farmers would often go out and look for quartz crystals. Quartz crystals are a big thing up there.
Sure.
Always have been. And they would take them to Hot Springs where there was a market for them. And sometimes they just set their wagon up in the street, one of the Hot Springs streets on Central Avenue, for example. And we have a picture of somebody doing that, selling crystals off the back of his wagon. Or they'd sell them. We had 3 jewelers here in town. They'd sell them to the local jewelers, and they advertised them as Hot Springs diamonds. They were very popular. And they also used them, they called them lens pebbles, and they'd use them for a kind of spectacles too. So Hot Springs diamonds, those quartz crystals, were a good source of cash income for the, because this was like subsistence farming time.
Well, and let's be frank about it here. So two things. You brought up the Noviculite earlier. The better part of Garland County, Saline County, this west end of Saline County, is shattered chert. And it's if to those of you that aren't familiar, if you look at it, it's kind of a clay-like rock that will shatter very easy and can make some kind of sharp edges. And you think, well, that's convenient for Indian heads, arrowheads, and so forth. Yeah, but it's not so convenient if you're trying to grow road crops. It doesn't do that so great, right?
Mm-hmm. No, of course, I'm not an expert on any of that at all, but
tell me, where did we get the name Dark Corner? Where did that come from? Do you know? Is there an etymology on that?
Well, we have our best guess. Of course, it was a very isolated part of the county with no big urban areas, urban centers in it. It's hard to get to. The people were very independent and didn't like people coming in telling them what to do. They didn't like their neighbors telling them what to do. I think these were feisty folks.
Sounds familiar.
And there was some moonshining going on. This was even long before Prohibition. People felt, farmers provided for themselves. They raised their hogs and made their own bacon, and they were self-sufficient in many ways. And they thought it was just normal to what they call run some whiskey and make a little whiskey for personal consumption or for medicinal purposes. And they did not approve of the government trying to tax that. So there was that kind of moonshining going on, which was still illegal. And
well, but just to interject just for a second, the same way that beer came about is the same way that moonshine came about. And that is, monks were watching their grain just go to rot because you couldn't eat it all within a certain time frame. You could make bread out of it, or you could do something later and you made beer. Well, that's what the monks did in Europe. Well, here in the hills of the woods, corn didn't grow year round. We had good crops, but as soon as you were through growing corn, you had to make it through February or March till something started coming out of the ground again. And turning it into whiskey was a way to make high calorie alcohol and money. And you could preserve that grain you have left over that wouldn't turn into rot come the spring, right?
And it was just part of the economy of the farmstead in a way. And like I said, there wasn't huge commercial productions or whatever, but there was some of that going on that they, if federal tax collectors came around, they were not very friendly to. And there were occasional shootings, killings, family feuds, and things like that. And it got this tough reputation. Now, there's a wonderful man named William Asa Talley, who was from that area. There's a Talley cemetery up there. And he wrote a paper in 1908 giving the history of the Dark Corner. And he said he did it in particular so people would form a more favorable opinion of us people who have been branded as ignorant, heathen cutthroats. So, and he
didn't mince any words, did he?
Yeah, he pointed out that he thought the name Dark Corner had been invented by a prominent farmer there named T.N. White. No way to prove that. And but he says the first time it appeared in print was in November 19th, 1893, in an article printed in the Hot Springs Daily Graphic, which was the Hot Springs newspaper. And people just took it up. They liked that term.
The Dark Corner.
Even though there was a lot more to Marble than that kind of. The kind of that rough side. There were churches and friendly people and all kinds of good stuff too.
Well, you're talking about the early 1800s where there was train travel, but it wasn't in Marble, Arkansas. And so
train travel.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there was train travel in Europe or in the northeast part of the United States, but it certainly wasn't in Marble, Arkansas. And
no,
the reason
in fact, the first train came into Hot Springs in 1876.
Really, after the war. Well, and where I'm going with that is that, the fastest speed you were going to go anywhere was on the back of a horse. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
So you tended to not go too far at a time, right?
No. And I mean, coming into town to Hot Springs was a huge trip, particularly because that's a big area. If you come from the farthest corner of Marble Township, that's several more miles. And people would come into Hot Springs and, they couldn't do their shopping, turn around and go back. They'd stay in a wagon yard and they would they would actually stay in the wagon yard instead of like hotels or boarding houses. They were set up so that you could rent space in like a big barn thing that was there. There was one on Park Avenue, kind of across from where the Bill Clinton Boyd home is now. In particular, they might have used because that would be in the way. They would bring bedding. They would bring food. The women would bring their Dutch ovens and they'd cook. And they'd kind of like camp out in this big barn type area. And then they'd sell the produce they'd raised. They'd buy anything that they couldn't produce themselves. They'd enjoy the sights of the town and stay here a day or two or three and then take their wagon back home.
So the term pack a lunch was very literal, right? You didn't just drive into Hot Springs for 30 minutes or for an hour. It could be a multi-day event.
It could be a multi-day event. The distances were something like the first church up there, the Old Marble Baptist Church, was formed in 1848, which was really, really early. And of course, it's the oldest church started in that part of the county, of several counties. That's a really, really old one. It's still there today. And when it was formed, they'd meet once a month. And people would come from as far as 30 miles around, and they'd have preaching and church business meetings all day Saturday, and they just camp out Saturday night. They'd have a sunrise service the next morning, and then people would spread out and go home. Distances were something.
Well, now let me, and for those of you that don't know, because I know we're spoiled by today's modern technologies, the trot of a horse, the 30 miles on the back of a horse, on a buckboard, on a wagon, on a whatever, was the better part of a day's journey, right? I mean, maybe 2 days journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Once a month.
And of course, it was a social occasion too that I'm sure people look forward to very much. Exchange news, meet your relatives and old friends you hadn't seen for a month, and community events. People loved to get together, and they really, like you said, faced great transportation problems to do it, but it's what you did. Well,
Diane's great grandfather, is from Buckville.
And we took Buckville.
We took a drive up to Buckville, which is now partly underwater, partly under part of the Ozark of the Washita Lake Washita. And I remember thinking, now the rest of her family lives in Donaldson, just south of or north of Arkadelphia, south of Malvern. And I'm thinking, to get by horse or any type of means from Donaldson or the Malvern area to Buckville was a multi-day event. You did not just come sliding in, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And people lose sight of that today.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, and you, Liz, you really, and I know I got to be respectful of your time. I've got about 10 minutes to wrap up, and then I know you need to run to another meeting. Tell me about what happened when the train came in to Hot Springs, because that had to be a game changer.
Oh, it was. Before then, there was people took a train to Little Rock, the Iron Mountain, from there to Malvern. Then they switched trains at Malvern to the Hot Springs Railroad, newly built, which took them, at Malvern, they had to get off and take the El Paso stagecoach into Hot Springs, 14 miles over a bumpy road. Now, for a tourist resort, this is not an efficient way to get lots of people into your town. So a man named Diamond Joe Reynolds,
I remember the name,
decided to build a railroad, and he did in 1876. And it was a beautiful thing: mahogany, red velvet curtains.
And it really, I had land
it was gorgeous.
I had land on Lonsdale Creek, and the railroad came right down behind that. It paralleled the old Lonsdale Highway.
Mm-hmm. So the railroad allowed so many more people to come easily, and of course, materials and things too. And then another one, and its station was where the convention center is now. And later, what became the Missouri Pacific Line came in around 1902. I'm oversimplifying here because, railroads morphed together and had different names. It's very confusing, but it became the Missouri Pacific, and its depot was where Transportation Plaza is in Hot Springs today. And that was a game changer. Can you imagine in the early days when people really believed they needed to take the thermal waters for having a hope of cure or relief from pain? Even taking a stagecoach from Little Rock back in the day, it would be like a 16 or 17-hour trip, and particularly in the 1850s and 60s and early 70s, over really, of course, the roads weren't paved or anything, bumpy, hilly stuff. Think how much you must have needed the hope of those thermal waters for a sick person or a very arthritic person to make a journey like that.
Well,
it shows the power of the thermal waters.
And people, to two things. People ask today, well, why don't we have the thermal waters? Why can't you get in them? Number one, they'll scald you. Number two, they're radioactive. But, skip past those couple of details. I think our audience, the last little teaser I want is, why don't you tell people, I'd love to hear, and maybe I'm mistaken, tell me what a drummer is on a train.
Oh, okay. And when I come back next time, I also want to tell you about moonshining during Prohibition up in the dark corner, because
I can't wait.
Then. Okay. Drummers were people who would meet visitors on the train or as soon as they got off the train or get into town, and they would steer them to certain doctors, hotels, or bathhouses. They'd say, the best, you have to go to this guy. Well, they were paid to bring these people in, and baths were given by doctors' prescriptions then, so it was important for a doctor to get these people. Now, they would often, doctors were split. Half of them thought this was an evil system, and the other half said, no, this is going to make me money. I'm going to do it. And these drummers would steer people often to quack doctors or to bad hotels that would overcharge them, or boarding houses. And it was a terrible system. People complained about it. A little ordinance was passed here and there, but it took decades for it to be stamped out.
Well, now you had drummers, if I'm not mistaken, there were drummers that would come from Chicago and they would ride the train system.
Oh, yes,
with
yes.
other people,
and they would
hundreds of miles.
They would befriend people coming to Hot Springs for medical treatment on the train journey and say, well, I went to this doctor and he was so good and he helped me. And
my goodness. Well, I want to tell you,
drumming was called a very big evil. Yes,
I can imagine. Well, but I want to tell you that when you go to for those that if we piqued your interest a little, number one, we want to go to the Garland County Historical Society, which I will come back to real quick. And we joke it's the Historical Society, but you'll remember that. They have a great program here where you can go to the website and search. You could actually search for the Dark Corner, and it will have issues there that we see lined up. Am I not sharing that screen? I'm not sharing that screen. Yeah, give me 1 second here. Sorry. But you can actually go to the Garland County Historical Society and go through their archives or look through part of their archives. The best way, though, is that we need members. Is that correct? Am I on the right button?
We are supported by the community, and members receive a copy of our annual journal, The Record. If you go into store, you'll see it, I think.
Okay.
There, The Record 2022 is in. It's a wonderful book, really. It's usually 160 to 200 pages with articles each year about different aspects of Garland County history. And we are the County Historical Society, not the Hot Springs. We are interested in, and we try to record and educate about the history of the whole county, not just Hot Springs. But members, of course, get a copy of the journal, and we're working on some other benefits of membership, and they really help us to continue our preservation and our education work. And they can go to our website and join through the website, or they can just contact me here at the Historical Society.
I tell you what, we're going to have your email address listed below, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Oh, that's great.
Sure. And we'll give you the phone number. The Country Doctors of Arkansas. I can see a half dozen books here already. I would have to. This is so interesting.
Yeah, some of these we published ourselves, and others we acquired for resale because we thought people would be interested in. Sure. Country Doctors of Arkansas is by a wonderful man named Dr. Sam Taggart, who I bet your listeners would love to hear you interview.
Well, I'd love to. I didn't know it was still live. I will say, and Liz, thank you. I've wanted to do this since I met Clive in a parking lot 3 years ago, and he's a wonderful guy. We want to have him and you on again soon, real quick. When you come back, you're going to tell us about moonshining in the Dark Corner, okay?
Yes, and I want to invite people to our meeting at the Garland County Library on February 21st. That's the third Tuesday of the month, which is going to be another program that tells about it's about Hot Springs National Park and its importance in the health community and all kinds of interesting things that people don't know about it. So they can also live stream it.
Okay, great. And so we'll publish this show in time for that event. Let me also just cut to the chase real quick. So what I had heard was, correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe we'll leave a teaser here before we go to the next one, but the Dark Corner was where people would go when they were on the lam. Is that correct?
When they what?
When they were on the lam. I mean, if you got in trouble in Hot Springs, which was a pretty insular place, you would go to the Dark Corner and kind of hide out.
Oh, you could do that, and people would not want to cooperate with law enforcement from outside the county. There was one local man named Aiken who, when he was 16, was visiting somebody down in Texas, and they had too much to drink. They were saying goodbye to a train at the depot, and people were just shooting in the air. Well, he shot and killed somebody accidentally. And he was put into the pen, escaped after 2 years, and came back home to the dark corner. And everybody knew he just lived the rest of his life up there. He said he'd plow his field with a 6-gun in his belt and his shotgun by the fence pole. And and people knew he was up there, but they didn't really want to come up here and drag him back out again. And eventually after he lived a lifetime up here and raised kids here and everything, the Texas governor gave him a pardon.
As you're prone to do after you lived out your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Liz, it has been truly, seriously a delight. Thank you for being with us today. Okay.
Thank you for having me. I love for people to find out about our society and about our wonderful history and become a part of it.
And I tell you what, if there's ever a good charitable cause, the Garland County Historical Society, great folks give their time and effort and pay their own way. Is that fair enough?
That's fair enough. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thanks, Liz. We'll see you next time, dear.
Thanks for watching and listening to Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a weekly podcast starring Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Visit the website at hotspringsvillageinsideout.com.